My name is Peter Sullivan, and I'm 62 years old. For 4 decades, I served as operations supervisor at CityGrid Utilities in Chicago, Illinois. 40 years of my life dedicated to keeping the lights on for millions of people across the windy city. I knew every transformer, every power line, every backup system like the back of my hand. The electrical grid wasn't just my job, it was my life's work. I was just 3 months away from retirement. 3 months from finally hanging up my hard hat and enjoying the pension I'd earned through decades of 12-hour shifts, emergency calls at 2 a.m., and keeping Chicago's power flowing through everything from blizzards to heat waves. I had it all planned out. My wife Susan and I would finally take that trip to Yellowstone we'd been talking about since 1985. We'd bought a small cabin up in Wisconsin. Life was going to be good. But more than that, I had something special planned for my farewell. A legacy project. I'd spent the last 2 years developing a comprehensive optimization plan for Chicago's aging electrical infrastructure. It wasn't just another routine upgrade. This was a complete reimagining of how we could make the grid more efficient, more reliable, and ready for the next 40 years. I'd poured everything I knew into those blueprints, every lesson learned from 4 decades in the field. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video, and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The plan was brilliant, if I do say so myself. I'd identified 17 critical junction points where we could install smart routing systems, reduce power loss by 30%, and eliminate the chronic brownouts that plagued the South Side every summer. It would save the city millions in energy costs and give Chicago one of the most advanced municipal power grids in the country. I imagined them naming it the Sullivan Grid Optimization Project, a fitting capstone to my career. Then Kyle Peterson showed up. Kyle was 35, fresh out of Northwestern's MBA program, with perfectly styled hair and suits that cost more than I made in a month. He'd been hired as the new regional operations manager, technically my boss, though I'd been doing the job since before he was born. The guy had never worked a day in the field, never climbed a power pole, never had to restore electricity to a hospital during a storm. But he had that MBA and a vocabulary full of corporate buzzwords that impressed the suits upstairs. From day one, Kyle made it clear he thought I was dead weight. "Peter," he'd say in that condescending tone, "we need to modernize our approach. Your traditional methods might have worked in the past, but we're moving into the digital age." Traditional methods. That's what he called 4 decades of keeping Chicago's lights on. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. New managers often feel the need to make their mark. So I scheduled a meeting to present my legacy project, thinking maybe this would show him what real experience could accomplish. I spent hours preparing the presentation, breaking down the technical aspects into terms he could understand, showing him the cost-benefit analysis, the implementation timeline, everything. Kyle listened for maybe 10 minutes before interrupting. "Peter, I appreciate the effort, but this seems antiquated. We're looking at AI-driven solutions, machine learning algorithms, predictive analytics. Your plan is basically just moving some wires around." Moving some wires around. That's how he described 2 years of engineering work that would revolutionize Chicago's power infrastructure. "Kyle," I said, keeping my voice level, "those 17 junction points I identified are critical failure nodes. I've analyzed 40 years of outage data, weather patterns, load distributions. This isn't just moving wires. It's redesigning the entire grid architecture." He waved his hand dismissively. "Look, Peter, I know you mean well, but the board wants innovation. They want to see we're embracing Industry 4.0 principles. Your project feels like something from the Reagan administration." That stung, but I kept my composure. "Would you like me to walk you through the technical specifications, the load calculations, the redundancy protocols?" "That won't be necessary," Kyle said, already turning back to his computer. "I'll be presenting my own modernization initiative to the board next month, something more aligned with current industry standards." His own modernization initiative. The man had been on the job for 6 weeks. Over the following days, I watched Kyle scramble to put together his presentation. He'd hired some consulting firm out of Boston, McKinsey or Bain. One of those outfits that charges a fortune to tell you what your own employees already know. They were promising revolutionary grid optimization through artificial intelligence and predictive modeling. It was all buzzwords and fancy graphics, but I could see the fundamental flaws in their approach. They didn't understand Chicago's unique infrastructure challenges, the way the old industrial districts interfaced with the newer residential areas, the seasonal load variations that I'd been managing for decades. But Kyle was convinced he'd found the golden ticket. He started holding meetings about our AI initiative, taking credit for ideas that were clearly lifted from my own documentation. I'd see him in the hallways talking to other managers about his vision for the future of urban power distribution. The betrayal came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was called into Kyle's office at 8 a.m. sharp. He had some woman from HR there, Janet Morrison, a company lifer who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Peter," Kyle began, "we've been evaluating the department's direction, and we've decided to make some changes." I knew what was coming, but I let him talk. "Your position is being eliminated as part of our organizational restructuring. We're transitioning to a more streamlined, technology-focused approach." "I see," I said quietly. "And my retirement timeline?" "We're offering you a generous separation package," Janet interjected, sliding a folder across the desk. 3 months salary, full benefits continuation, and of course, your pension remains intact. 3 months salary, for 40 years of service. I'd been planning to leave in 3 months anyway, but this was different. This was being thrown out like yesterday's newspaper. "What about the knowledge transfer?" I asked. "The operational procedures, the emergency protocols, the grid documentation?" Kyle leaned back in his chair. "We've digitized most of that information. And frankly, Peter, we're moving in a completely different direction. Your approach doesn't align with our vision for the future." My approach. 40 years of keeping Chicago's power on, and it was just an approach that didn't align with his vision. I signed the separation papers without a word. What was the point of arguing? Kyle had already made up his mind, and corporate America doesn't reward loyalty anymore. But as I cleaned out my desk that afternoon, packing 40 years of accumulated knowledge into cardboard boxes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The cold satisfaction of knowing someone was about to make a catastrophic mistake. You see, what Kyle didn't understand, what his MBA program and his Boston consultants couldn't teach him, was that Chicago's electrical grid wasn't just a network of wires and transformers. It was a living, breathing organism that had evolved over nearly a century. Every modification, every upgrade, every emergency fix had been carefully integrated into a complex system that required intimate knowledge to operate safely. My legacy project wasn't just about optimization. It was about understanding the delicate balance between Chicago's industrial South Side, where steel mills and factories demanded massive power loads, and the residential North Side, where millions of people expected their lights to work every time they flipped a switch. The grid had quirks, personality traits that only someone with 4 decades of experience could navigate. I'd built redundancy systems that weren't in any manual. I'd created workarounds for equipment failures that would take a newcomer months to figure out. Most importantly, I'd designed my optimization project with what I called experience gates, critical decision points, where you needed to understand not just what to do, but why it worked in Chicago's unique environment. Kyle thought he could just take my documentation and hand it off to his AI consultants. He was about to learn the difference between information and wisdom. 3 days after my departure, Kyle called me at home. "Peter, I need some clarification on your grid project documentation." "I'm retired, Kyle," I said calmly. "You'll need to figure it out yourself. Come on, be reasonable. I just need you to explain some of the technical specifications. The specifications are all documented. If you can't understand them, maybe you should reconsider implementing the project. Look, I'll make it worth your while. Consulting fees, $150 an hour. I almost laughed. The man fires me and 3 days later wants to hire me back as a consultant. Kyle, I provided complete documentation before I left. Everything you need is in those files. But some of this stuff doesn't make sense. Why did you route the south side feeds through the old Commonwealth Edison substations? The AI analysis says we should bypass them entirely. The AI analysis is wrong, I said simply. Those substations handle load balancing during peak summer demand. Bypass them, and you'll overload the primary lines when temperatures hit 95 degrees. But the predictive models don't account for Chicago's microclimate variations. The lakefront stays cooler, but the inland neighborhoods spike to 105. I've been managing those differentials since 1984. There was a long pause. So what do you recommend? I recommend you stick with the current system until you understand why it works the way it does. That's not an option. The board approved the modernization project. We're implementing it next month. I felt a familiar chill. Kyle, that's not enough time for proper testing. You need at least 6 months of simulation runs, stress testing, backup protocols. Peter, this is 2024. We have AI systems that can model these scenarios in real time. We don't need 6 months of old-school testing. Suit yourself, I said and hung up. Over the next few weeks, I heard through the grapevine that Kyle was pushing forward with his revolutionary grid upgrade. My former colleagues would call me, guys like Tommy Kowalski, who'd been working substations for 25 years, and Maria Santos, the best electrical engineer CityGrid had ever hired. They were all worried. Peter, Kyle's ignoring the safety protocols you put in place, Tommy told me. He says they're outdated, that the AI will handle emergency shutdowns automatically. What about the manual override systems? I asked. He's having them removed. Says they're redundant. I felt my blood pressure spike. Those manual overrides had saved the city during the 2011 heat wave, when automated systems failed, and we had to manually reroute power to keep the hospitals running. But Kyle didn't know about 2011. He'd been in college. Maria called me yesterday, Tommy continued. She's thinking about quitting. Says Kyle won't listen to any technical concerns. He just keeps talking about disruptive innovation and paradigm shifts. Tell Maria to document everything, I said. Every safety concern, every technical objection. Make sure it's all in writing. You think something's going to go wrong? Tommy, I've been doing this for 40 years. When someone ignores basic safety protocols and rushes implementation, something always goes wrong. The launch was scheduled for the first week of June, right when Chicago's summer heat typically kicks in. Perfect timing for a catastrophic failure. Kyle held a press conference standing in front of CityGrid's downtown headquarters, promising that Chicago would soon have the most advanced municipal power grid in America. We're implementing cutting-edge artificial intelligence systems that will optimize power distribution in real time, he announced to the cameras. This represents a complete transformation of how we think about urban energy management. I watched from my living room, shaking my head. The man was about to bet Chicago's electrical stability on algorithms that had never been tested under real-world conditions. The day of the launch, I made sure I was home. I had a feeling my phone would be ringing. June 7th, 2024. The temperature hit 98 degrees by noon, the first real heat wave of the summer. I was in my backyard, watering Susan's tomato plants, when my phone started buzzing. First call was from Tommy. Peter, we've got problems. The AI system is routing too much power through the south side industrial lines. The transformers are overheating. What about the load balancing protocols I documented? Kyle overrode them. Says the AI knows better than 40-year-old procedures. I set down the garden hose. Tommy, you need to manually reduce the industrial load immediately. Those transformers weren't designed for sustained overload. I tried. Kyle locked me out of the manual controls. Says everything has to go through the AI system now. Second call came 20 minutes later. Maria Santos, and she was panicking. Peter, the lakefront substations are cascading. The AI is trying to compensate for the south side overload by pulling power from the north side, but it's not accounting for the residential surge from air conditioners. Maria, you need to activate the emergency protocols. Section 4.7 of my documentation. Kyle deleted those protocols, said they were legacy code that would interfere with the AI's learning algorithms. I felt my chest tighten. 40 years of accumulated knowledge thrown away because some kid with an MBA thought he knew better. Maria, listen carefully. You need to physically disconnect the lakefront feeds before the whole north side goes dark. I can't. The AI won't let me. It keeps overriding my commands. By 3 p.m., half of Chicago's south side was without power. The steel mills, the auto plants, the hospitals, everything running on emergency generators. But that was just the beginning. Kyle's AI system, trying to compensate for the industrial blackout, began pulling massive amounts of power from the residential grid. Air conditioners across the city were working overtime in the heat wave, and the system couldn't handle the load. My phone rang again. This time it was Sarah Chen, CityGrid's CEO. Peter, we have an emergency. We need you to come in immediately. I'm retired, Sarah. You'll need to work this out with Kyle. Peter, please. Half the city is without power. The mayor's office is breathing down my neck. The governor's called in the National Guard. Where's Kyle? He's in crisis meetings. The AI system isn't responding the way the consultants predicted. I tried to tell him 6 months of testing was necessary. He wouldn't listen. Peter, we'll pay you whatever you want. Name your price. I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline. Even from 10 miles away, I could see the lights flickering downtown. Sarah, I documented everything. The procedures, the protocols, the safety measures. Kyle chose to ignore them. The documentation isn't enough. We need someone who understands the system. Kyle said the AI would handle everything. Maybe you should ask the AI. I hung up. By 6 p.m., the disaster was making national news. CNN was running live coverage from downtown Chicago, where traffic lights were out and people were walking home from work because the elevated trains had shut down. The anchor was interviewing Kyle, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in one day. Mr. Peterson, can you explain how a routine system upgrade led to the worst power outage in Chicago's history? Kyle was sweating profusely, his usually perfect hair disheveled. We're experiencing some unexpected system interactions. Our AI algorithms are working to resolve the issues, but the legacy infrastructure is proving more complex than anticipated. Are you saying the city's electrical grid is too old for modern technology? Not at all. We're dealing with some unique challenges that weren't accounted for in our initial modeling. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The mayor held a press conference at 8 p.m., standing in front of City Hall with emergency floodlights powered by generators. Mayor Johnson was furious. The citizens of Chicago deserve answers. How does a utility company, a company we trust with our city's most critical infrastructure, implement a system that fails so catastrophically? Behind him, you could see the darkened skyline of downtown Chicago. 5 million people without power, hospitals running on backup generators, elderly people trapped in elevators, traffic chaos throughout the city. Kyle called me at 9:30 p.m. His voice was shaking. Peter, I need your help. The AI system is locked up. It won't respond to any commands. The consultants say they need at least 48 hours to diagnose the problem. 48 hours. Kyle, people are going to die. You've got hospitals on generator power, traffic systems down, emergency services overwhelmed. I know. That's why I'm calling. Can you come in? Can you fix this? I was quiet for a long moment. Kyle, 3 months ago you told me my approach was antiquated. You said I didn't align with your vision for the future. You threw away 40 years of experience because you thought an AI could do my job better. Peter, please. I was wrong, I admit it. Just help me fix this. The fix is simple, Kyle. You need to bypass the AI system entirely and return to manual control. But that requires someone who understands the grid's operational characteristics. I'll authorize whatever overtime you want. Double time, triple time. It's not about money, Kyle. It's about respect. You didn't just fire me. You dismissed everything I'd learned in 4 decades. You treated my experience like it was worthless. I'll make it right. I'll give you your job back, full benefits, whatever you want. I looked at my retirement papers on the kitchen table. Kyle, I am retired. You made sure of that. Now you get to live with the consequences. The power stayed off for 3 days. 3 days of emergency generators, National Guard deployment, and round-the-clock crisis management. CityGrid's stock price dropped 40%. The mayor launched an investigation. The federal government stepped in to oversee the restoration process, and Kyle Peterson became the face of the biggest infrastructure failure in Chicago's history. On the fourth day, Sarah Chen showed up at my front door at 6 a.m. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. "Peter, the Federal Energy Commission is threatening to take over CityGrid. The city council is talking about revoking our municipal contract. We're facing bankruptcy." I invited her in for coffee. Susan was still asleep upstairs, and I kept my voice low. "Sarah, I warned Kyle about rushing the implementation. I told him the system needed extensive testing." "I know. I've read your documentation. All of it. Peter, you were right about everything. The load balancing, the manual overrides, the emergency protocols. Kyle ignored every single safeguard you put in place. And now Chicago's been without power for 3 days. The federal team brought in emergency generators from 6 states. The National Guard is distributing ice to nursing homes. This is the worst infrastructure crisis in Illinois history." I sipped my coffee. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" "I want you to come back. Not as a consultant, not as a temporary fix. I want you to be our Chief Technology Officer. Full executive authority. Report directly to me. Design the grid however you think it should be designed. I'm retired." "Peter, you're the only person who understands this system well enough to fix it permanently. The federal investigators interviewed our entire engineering team. They all said the same thing. Peter Sullivan is the only one who really knows how Chicago's grid works." I set down my coffee cup. "Kyle destroyed more than just the power grid, Sarah. He destroyed trust. He threw away institutional knowledge that took 40 years to build. Kyle's gone. I fired him yesterday. His consulting firm fired him this morning. He'll never work in the energy sector again. That got my attention. You fired him. The board voted unanimously. He's being investigated by the Federal Energy Commission for negligent endangerment. The city's talking about criminal charges." I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. Not anger, not revenge, just the quiet vindication of being proven right. "Sarah, I'll come back on one condition. I want complete authority over grid operations. No interference from consultants, no AI systems, no MBA theories. We do this the right way." "Done. And I want to hire back every experienced engineer Kyle forced out. Tommy Kowalski, Maria Santos, the whole team. Whatever you need." I returned to CityGrid on June 11, 2024, to a hero's welcome. The employees who'd stayed through the crisis applauded when I walked into the operations center. Tommy Kowalski actually had tears in his eyes. "Peter, thank God you're back. This place fell apart without you." The federal investigators had spent 3 days trying to understand my documentation. They'd concluded that Kyle's modifications had created what they called cascading failure points. Exactly what I'd warned about. The AI system, designed to optimize efficiency, had no understanding of Chicago's unique infrastructure challenges. I spent the next week methodically restoring the grid to its original configuration. Every AI modification was removed. Every manual override was reinstalled. Every safety protocol was restored. By June 18th, Chicago had full power again. The mayor held another press conference, this time with me standing beside him. "Peter Sullivan represents the best of Chicago's workforce," Mayor Johnson announced. 40 years of dedication, expertise that money can't buy, and the wisdom to know that technology serves people, not the other way around. The local news ran feature stories about my return. The Tribune called me the man who saved Chicago. The Sun-Times ran an editorial titled "Experience Matters." I was invited to testify before Congress about infrastructure resilience. But the real satisfaction came from the work itself. I redesigned the grid with a hybrid approach. Modern monitoring systems combined with proven operational procedures. We kept the useful innovations while preserving the institutional knowledge that Kyle had tried to discard. 6 months later, CityGrid's new system became the national model for urban electrical infrastructure. Other cities sent delegations to study what we'd built. I was invited to speak at engineering conferences across the country. Kyle Peterson, meanwhile, disappeared from the industry entirely. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to Phoenix, working as a mid-level project manager for a solar installation company. His LinkedIn profile, which had once boasted about revolutionizing urban energy systems, now simply listed Renewable Energy Project Coordination. The federal investigation concluded that Kyle's decisions had endangered millions of people and caused over $2 billion in economic damage. He was fined $500,000 and banned from working in critical infrastructure for 10 years. I could have felt vindictive, but I didn't. Kyle had learned the hardest lesson of his life. That experience can't be automated, that wisdom can't be downloaded, and that respect is earned through decades of dedicated service, not through MBA buzzwords and corporate politics. I officially retired on my original date, September 15, 2024. But this time, it was different. The City Council declared it Peter Sullivan Day. CityGrid created the Sullivan Institute for Grid Technology, where experienced engineers would train the next generation. My legacy project was finally implemented, but not as I'd originally planned. Instead of a simple optimization upgrade, it became a comprehensive training program, ensuring that Chicago's electrical grid would always be managed by people who understood not just the technology, but the city it served. Susan and I took that trip to Yellowstone. We bought the cabin in Wisconsin, but I also spend 2 days a week mentoring young engineers, teaching them that in a world obsessed with the latest technology, the most important tool is still the human mind that understands how everything works together. The last time I saw Kyle was at O'Hare Airport, about a year later. He was waiting for a flight to Phoenix, looking older, more tired. He saw me and walked over. "Peter, I want to apologize. I was wrong about everything. Kyle, you were young and ambitious. That's not a crime. I destroyed my career. I endangered millions of people, all because I thought I knew better than someone with 40 years of experience. You learned from it. That's what matters." He shook his head. "I'll never recover from this. My name is synonymous with the worst infrastructure failure in Chicago's history." "Kyle, failure is only permanent if you don't learn from it. You're still young. You can build something better." I meant it. Kyle Peterson had made a catastrophic mistake, but he'd also learned the most important lesson of his career: that wisdom and experience are irreplaceable, and that true leadership means respecting the knowledge of those who came before you. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications of new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.